Ready?
I'm ready.
Cool. So today is going to be the Gary episode.
Oh, Gary Phillips.
And the reason, so for anybody who hasn't, if this might be your first episode watching, Gary Phillips is your childhood best friend, right?
Yeah, he is.
And the reason I want to talk about Gary is because the other day I came over here and you were on the phone with Gary, right? And you were on speakerphone. And so when I walked in, I just said, "Hey, Gary, how's it going?" And I heard his voice for, I don't remember. I remember things about him when I was little.
Sure.
But I don't know if I've ever heard his voice. You know, I did obviously when I was a kid, but I can't remember having heard his voice.
Right.
And when I heard his voice and he said, "Hey, Alec, how you doing?" There was so much like love and sweetness in his voice.
Yeah.
And and from the stories you told me, obviously I knew Gary Phillips is top-tiered good guy, but hearing his voice like really cemented how much Gary is just the bomb, right?
Yeah, he's top notch. Yeah.
So I want you to share some Gary stories with me today, right? And you've shared some, so we might retread a little bit.
Yeah.
But let me give you a question that kind of started off with Gary, right?
All right.
So and it's stories I already know, so I want to hear you tell them.
Gotcha.
So Gary had a habit of, you would go to a grocery store or something like that, and Gary was already there, and he would see you, and he would mess with you when you didn't know he was in the same store.
I wouldn't know he was in there. He would mess with me.
Okay, so let's hear. I want to hear a couple of those.
So Gary was good-looking dude.
Okay.
He had long, brown, flowing hair. Mm-hmm. And for those, you can look it up. If you Google, what's the really good-looking guy?
Is it Fabio?
Fabio.
You always said Fabio.
He was on the cover of all these romance novels.
Yeah.
And so Gary
My Dinner with the Duke and all that stuff. Yeah.
Gary looked like a thin Fabio.
Yeah, he wasn't, because Fabio was a big muscular dude.
Gary was thin like I was. We were both pretty skinny guys.
Did Gary ever wear one of those open,
no.
white blouses and ride a white horse or anything?
Gary didn't. The great thing about Gary is he didn't know how handsome he was.
Okay.
And even if he knew, he might have known, but he never really acknowledged it. He just was trying to have fun.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So one time.
Did he have a smile that was just disarming?
Oh, it was it would light up a room, right?
Yeah.
And he would flash it anytime he had a chance.
Because he was a happy guy.
He was a happy dude.
Yeah.
So Gary, one time I was in Minyards was the name of a grocery store.
Minyards, okay.
And it was a big grocery store, and this is back.
What was the name of the grocery store? Sorry, I'm just. So when we lived in Cedar Hill.
Yeah.
Right?
That was Minyards.
That was a Minyards.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
because I couldn't remember, because there's also, you see ads for Menards.
They didn't have Menards back then.
I think it's a like a Minnesota.
Why does that sound like you're talking about?
It sounds like you kicked a pirate in the junk, you know what I mean? Menards, right?
We'll never get a sponsorship from them.
Menards ain't going to be calling us up.
No. But this is
Minyards. Okay.
Minyards, yeah. And I have another story about a grocery store when I was with him one time too that made me crack up.
Okay, I want to hear them both.
So I walk into this Minyards, which is right around the corner from both of our houses. Mm-hmm. And I walk in there and I'm just doing some basic shopping. I think I had my own place, and I was, ramen, tuna fish,
Pop-Tarts if you could afford them that week.
Pop-Tarts and Dr. Pepper.
Yeah.
And so Gary saw me.
What's your favorite Pop-Tart, by the way?
I'm not really a huge Pop-Tart guy, but I do like a strawberry Pop-Tart with a big old glass of milk.
Yeah.
That's my...
Yeah.
If I have to go with one, that's it.
Okay.
Because the chocolates, they don't get them quite right, but you can just put any kind of strawberry crap in there, and it's going to taste good. Yeah. So I'm inside there, and Gary sees me, and this is back before they didn't even have cameras on the ceiling back then.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What they did have is when you first walked in, if you looked to the left, there was a set of stairs that went up to this like press box area.
Yeah.
And it was like one-way glass up there.
Yeah.
So the people in the press box would watch all the people shopping, and if they saw somebody pulling some bad stuff.
Kind of like what you see above a high school football field where they get film and stuff like that. Yeah.
Exactly. And they also, typically they also had a security guard at the front door.
Yeah.
So if they saw
like
kids goofing around.
Loss prevention type dude.
And he'd be, he was some fat guy. When I was a kid, I remember taunting them.
Yeah.
We would walk out and hold up Snickers.
Come on, man.
And say, "You can't catch me. You can't." Now, it wasn't me. I don't remember doing that personally, but I know some kids that did that. So I'm inside there, and Gary sees me walk in. Well, Gary's this handsome dude.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of really cute little girls working the front cashiers. So he says, hey, he talks one of them into walking him up into that press box.
Okay.
And so he walks up there with this cute girl, and he gets on the microphone, and he says, Ty Fletzel. Like he makes up a name that sounds like Kyle Jetsel. Yeah. And he said it was the funniest thing because I'm walking, and he says, Ty Fletzel, please come to the front. And he said, I will go. And then he would say it again, Ty Fletzel, and I'd be, oh, that's not me. And then so I'd start walking again, and then he'd say, Rye Smetzer. And I'd be like, because it sounds like Kyle Jetsel. And after about the third one, I'm like, come on, something's going on, man.
But every 30 seconds, you'd be prairie dogging, like looking up.
Exactly. I would stop.
And he's up there at the top just dying with this girl. He's like, this cute girl. He's like, look at my buddy down there.
They're having so much fun, laughing. And they're in that box, so you can't see them. You can't hear them.
Yeah.
He said they laughed so hard because I'd be walking in and
perking up.
Because you hear something like you.
Yeah, like a dog who heard a rapper.
It's It's happened like a cat that hears a box.
Yep.
Yep. You know something's going on.
So they hit you with a Thai Fletzel and a rye pretzel.
And I think there was another Sty Metzger.
Metzger. Metzger.
But it's close enough. And I didn't.
He was just doing Jewish versions of your name, wasn't he?
He was just messing with it. And so then I'm like, after the third one, I stop and I'm like, something's happening.
Hi, Schnitzer.
I start walking towards the front and I glance up to see the door open and his head's
sticking out.
And he's just like,
gotcha.
Yeah, so when I saw him, we laughed so hard.
I bet, man.
And it was just, but then it was really this at the same moment. Mm. So I'm walking to the front. He comes running down. This little girl's running behind. They're having so much fun giggling.
Yeah.
And there's a big long line. Mm-hmm. I don't ever buy much.
She went home and said, Mom, I met my soulmate today.
Yeah. Gary was everybody's soulmate, by the way. Because he was so handsome and he was so friendly. And so just that guy didn't have a mean bone in his body.
Sure.
I
could hear that when I heard his voice the other day.
Yeah. You really can.
And he said, hey, Alec, like we were best friends.
Like your best friends.
And he knew me when I was, 8 years old, and I never saw him again, right? But he said, hey, Alec, like we have been best friends our whole life. Yeah. And I was like, that's the guy.
If you introduce Gary to anybody, they immediately feel like they're his friend because he gives
I could feel that over the phone.
He gives you that feeling.
Yeah.
Well, he comes down and we get in this big, long line. And he's still laughing. He's still in Gary mode.
Yeah. He's like, I got
and
you
so
good.
And he says,
if you could have seen yourself, kind of deal.
He was giving me
if it had been nowadays, he would have filmed it and it would have been a viral sensation.
It would have been viral. Yeah. And by the way, Gary was always I loved his pranks. So I never got upset or mad. It would just tickle me.
Yeah, because he wasn't.
They were harmless.
Yeah. I'm not a prank guy. I don't like pranks. I don't find it to be super duper funny.
Right.
And I think it's because most of them are mean spirited. You know what I mean?
Yeah. His were never that way. His were just silliness. But so we're standing in this line. There's like 13 people in front of us. It's really long. It must have been a busy time. And Gary said to me, "Hey,
I think this is the other story. I didn't know they were in the same trip.
Same vineyards, same time."
Okay.
He says, "Hey, Kyle, I can get us to the front of this line in no time at all." And I'm thinking, really? And I'm thinking he's just going to walk up and
sweet talk to the cashier. Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, let's see. I bet you can't.
He's going to pull one of those, hey, I left my dog in the car. Do you think that?
And Kyle, come on,
Yeah.
I thought he was going to do that. He didn't. He jumps on my back and he screams, "Give me all your money!" And he has this crazy look in his eyes.
He threw all his hair in his face.
He did it. Yeah, he did his hair crazy. And then the line went, and the little girl that was helping us was the cashier, and she just started giggling. She knew who he was.
Yeah.
And we just walked right to the front. And that was those two stories kind of.
Did you have anybody going, "What the crap, man?" afterward?
Yeah. Some people, not everybody runs. There's guys like us that turn and they're ready to stand up and but not in our line. They scattered. And so we walked right to the front.
That's great.
But you know what? I remember the first time you met Gary, or one of the first times. I don't know if you remember this.
This might be the only thing I remember about him.
Okay.
Yeah.
You remember when he came to our house in Cedar Hill?
Yep, I remember that.
Tell me why you
Here's
remember.
why I remember. And this is, like I said, really the only thing I remember about Gary, like you said, he had this long flowing, mahogany hair, you know what I mean?
Beautiful hair.
Yeah,
dude.
great head of hair. Well, he, at this point, we're living in Cedar Hill. He still lives in the same place he lived when he was a kid.
Still lives in Oak Cliff.
Still lives in Oak Cliff.
Within a mile of where he grew up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he would come over occasionally, and the one time I remember him coming over is he knocked on the door, and I happened to be the guy that went to go open the door. And I opened the door, and Jesus Christ was standing at the front door.
He had a full beard.
The Lord and Savior.
He was tan from summertime.
Yeah.
He would get a real good tan.
Yep.
I remember you turning around and you were white as a ghost.
Yeah. Yeah.
You thought the Lord had come to the front door.
Yeah, I thought I was going to have to atone, you know what I mean? As a 7-year-old, yeah. Yeah, he looked exactly like he looked in all of our books, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. The picture on the wall, you're like...
Yeah, I was... yeah.
And I think you ran over to me and said something about it. And I'm like, oh, no, that's Gary. And you were like...
He had grown, so on top of his flowing hair, he had grown out this beard.
Yeah, which he never did that, by the way.
He was just trying something new.
He has a really square, handsome jawline. And that's the only time I've ever seen him with a beard.
He was just trying something new.
Trying something new,
yeah. Yeah, so the creator of the whole universe was at our doorstep in Cedar
of the universe. Yeah. I remember you turned around like, holy moly. Yeah, and Zach he was even littler, so I think he was just in awe. I'm not sure he still might believe that Jesus came to the door.
Yeah. But that's the only interaction I can remember having with Gary, right? And then he came down and broke bread with it. Just kidding. He came down. You handed him.
You got a big long table. We all sat there.
Yep. He sat like this, right? Yeah.
And we're all leaning in.
Yeah. You gave him a glass of squirt, and he said, "This is my blood." You know?
Yeah. We gave him some
big red,
some purple Kool-Aid, something like that. Yeah. And Gary didn't come over very often, but Gary's one of those guys, and we all have these friends.
Yeah.
That you could not see or hear from in years.
Yeah, and you sit down and...
It's like you never...
Yeah.
You never...
So speaking of, tell me what he's been up to nowadays, because you told me he likes to go canoeing.
Yeah, he has I don't know if it's a canoe or what's the other one? It's
kayak?
Like a kayak,
okay.
Yeah, so Gary likes to stay busy. He's a busybody.
Yeah.
And growing up, he played a lot of soccer.
He was good too, huh?
He was really good, yeah. I remember...
Was he a defender, a winger? What was he?
He was he had taught him. Everybody thought he was left-footed because he had taught himself how to kick with his left foot so well.
Okay.
And so he was a left halfback.
Okay.
And we played a 4-4-2. My senior year, I played goalkeeper. Mm-hmm. And Gary played left halfback with two strikers in front of him.
Okay.
So he was really a winger and a left halfback.
Gotcha. Like an attacking midfielder.
Attacking midfielder. Okay, but he would also, he could ran like
By the way,
wind.
You played soccer as a kid, so you know that stuff. Yeah. Everything I know about soccer, I learned from FIFA. So playing FIFA,
you
right?
You probably know more than I do. Because I remember the first time you and Zach came to me, and y'all had been playing video games.
Yeah.
And you asked me, what's a cover two?
What's a cover two?
You asked me about professional football defense.
Dude, it was Madden 02.
Okay.
It was Madden 02.
Yeah.
It was the first football game we'd ever gotten a hold of.
Y'all were little.
Yep.
And you were like, Dad, what's a cover two? I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I got all excited.
We have two questions. What's a cover two and what's an option?
An option. An RPO, run pass option.
Yeah.
And I remember how excited
and why
I
is
was.
Michael Vick so much better than everybody?
I always wanted to get the Falcons because that's if you had him, you
guaranteed win, man. If you had the Falcons, it was a guaranteed win.
And you know what? That's how he was in the NFL.
Yep. So much better than everybody.
So much better than everybody else. That dude was a freak among freaks, wasn't he?
So Gary was left winger. Gary was a left winger.
Yeah, Gary was a left winger, and Gary and I went to elementary school together, and we were really close. And then he disappeared.
Okay.
Yeah, through middle school, I didn't see him at all, and he didn't go to Griner with us or anything. And then
Griner was the name of your middle school?
Middle school,
okay.
Yeah. W.E. Griner was the name of middle school.
And over there, is it 567 or 678? What is it?
It's
do you remember?
678.
Okay.
Yeah, because high school is 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah.
Okay.
So 6, 7, 8, he was gone, and he kind of disappeared. And back then, if a friend disappeared, you couldn't.
Well, back then, even in the 90s when I was growing up, you could make a best friend forever at a McDonald's playground, and then you would go, guess I'll never see you again.
Yeah. You're right. That's true. Yeah. That's true. But I showed up at Sunset, and he's there.
So did he just split off to a different middle
Well,
school?
what happened was Gary was never interested in school.
Okay.
And he had a mom who worked a lot, and I think at the end of 5th grade, I think he just kind of didn't turn in any work, and they held him back.
Oh.
So when I got in high school, he was a year behind me.
Okay.
And so I remember that he came in. I'm like, hey, and it was like we had never parted, you know. And so so then we ended up just palling around in high school, having all kinds of fun. And he was the guy and Gary was one of those guys that he kind of was just like me. We were into mischief, but nothing too bad.
Yeah.
And he didn't curse, and he didn't smoke, and he didn't drink, and he didn't do all the things that you were trying to avoid if you were trying to be a good kid.
Sure, yeah.
And so I think that's why we
the things that could escalate into.
That could escalate.
Yeah.
However, Gary did have a couple of very interesting. He was
vices, quirks,
curiosities.
Okay.
And by curiosities, I mean he was a fan of two things that to me were crazy when he got back in high school.
I think is one of them horror movies.
Not movies, books.
Books. Because he was the one that gave you the Silence of the Lambs,
No,
right?
it was
the Zodiac.
The Zodiac.
Okay.
Killer. Yeah.
You have to go back to like episode 2 or 3. We talked about the Zodiac.
I went over to his house one time. So Gary lived with his mom, and he had 2 little sisters.
Okay.
But his mom was never in great health, and I think she smoked while he was a baby. Okay. Because he had asthma. He'd get asthma periodically.
Gotcha. Okay.
But he was one of those, when you grow up in the hood, asthma, whatever. Just
the
running.
hood in the 70s and 80s too. It barely existed.
I think everybody had asthma in the hood. I did. My mom never smoked, but I know Gary would occasionally. He would have these asthma attacks.
Did he have a puffer or anything like that?
No,
Yikes.
You didn't do that. You just he would just
Kids
sit
didn't
down,
have that, especially in a low income area like you were in. Okay.
He would just sit down, and I would say, "You all right?" And he'd say, "Give me a minute," and he would just
Take
breathe.
deep
And I'm
breaths.
like, I was worried for a moment, and then he'd come back. He's like, "Don't worry about it. It happens every once in a while."
Man. Yikes.
But he loved. I went to his house one day, and his mom had created this bad habit of. First of all, she smoked like a chimney in their house, in their apartment.
Yeah.
But she had bought a newspaper, and she had set it on the ground, like in the living room. And I go over one day, and I am not. This is my high school mind talking.
Okay.
So there was a stack of newspapers, 6 feet high, and 6 feet square.
She made a fortress out of newspapers.
But there was nothing behind it or around it. It was just she just quit throwing them away. She just stacked them in the stack, and it was kind of one of those hoarder kind of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what he didn't know and I didn't know was that's stacked newspapers are
volatile.
roach motels.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking you were going to say it could tip over and hurt somebody.
Well, I mean, it probably could have, but she did a
knows?
good job of stacking. It was like she cared about stacking.
Yeah. That was an Adobe.
Yeah. But I remember going over there because Gary was at my house.
Did they like burrow through the middle of it and stuff like that?
If you just kind of lifted them up, they'd scatter. They were all through it.
Yeah. Shoot.
And so I didn't go over there a lot, but I remember one time I went over there, and the first time I saw
he's not going to be bothered by hearing this, is he?
No, he knows.
Okay.
Yeah, he knows.
Because sorry to interrupt. One of the reasons I want to have a Gary episode.
Oh, so he can hear.
Is so that we can pump him. You know what I mean?
He's great.
Right? Because I want you to send the link to this and have him realize how much we love him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And you know what? I think Gary's a guy. He'll watch this and he'll just laugh.
Good.
And then he'll call me and he'll want to talk about it.
He'll rehash the stories with you. That's what I want.
Exactly
that's what I want.
Do.
Okay.
Or he'll say, "Do you remember this? You remember this? You remember this?"
Yeah. That's what I want, right? I want him to call you and you guys, and then you can come tell me more stuff. That's exactly what I want.
We were at my house and we were going to eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And this is when my mom used to get this welfare peanut butter in a metal can.
Vat, basically.
And you'd have to the lid off.
Yeah.
And then when you opened it up, there was a cement block at the bottom, and then like 6 inches of oil. And you had to just stick your knife in there and start stirring.
Yep.
And it never got smooth. It was always real. And people that have experienced this know what I'm talking about. And when you would put it on your bed, you would try to smear it, and it would just tear your bread up.
Yeah.
And I remember we're at our house one day, and we slapped some jelly on there, and I get the peanut butter out, and I'm working it. He's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I got to work the peanut butter, man. Got to make it pliable."
Yeah.
Because every time you set it down,
it would resettle.
It would resettle.
Yeah.
Yeah, my mom's going to love this. But you know what? I have fond memories of this stuff.
Yeah. Your forearms were crazy.
Dude, I was... Yeah.
You were like a baker.
I knew what I was doing. But so I remember spreading it. It just tore the bread up. And Gary's like, what the crap is that? I'm like, it's peanut butter. He's like, no, that's not peanut butter. Come on. I'm like, what? He said, just let's throw this outside and we're going to go to my house and get some peanut butter and jelly. We go over there and he had Jif. And I'd never seen it before. You know, I'm in high school.
Yeah.
And I'd never seen Jif before. And he pulls it out and
you were like, where's the oil?
He spreads it. I'm like, oh, that's like actual butter. It's like peanut butter. He's like, I don't know what the crap you got going over there, Kyle. But that's when I found out about the newspapers. And he had a library. Remember, this is a guy who really was very simple-minded. He's You know, he reminds me a lot of Theo Vaughn.
Okay.
Because he just sees the world the way he sees it, and he's happy, and he doesn't really care, and he's a friendly guy, you know, and he's happy. And I remember seeing he had these bookshelves in his room that were just stacked with books, and I'm like, I didn't really see Gary as a reader.
Gary was reading.
And he was reading horror books.
Okay.
And he gave me, and I said, hey, which one should I read?
Yeah.
And he says, read this one first. And it was, the first one he gave me was not the Zodiac Killer, because that one, I didn't read anymore after that. The first one he gave me was a story about a little kid killer.
Oh my gosh.
There was these people dying, and it was a mass murderer. And this investigator's trying to find out who it is, and it's in like New York City. Yeah. And this little kid starts following him around and starts asking questions and wants to be involved. And he thinks this kid he's grooming him to be a detective, and the kid ends up being the killer. Yeah.
It was a kid killing other kids.
No, he was killing grown-ups.
Oh.
I know.
I thought it was a grown man killing children.
No, it was a child. It was a 12-year-old killing adults.
That's gnarly.
I know. And you don't know it till the very end. You start getting wait a minute, what the heck? It's one of those twists that you're like, shocked.
Yeah, that's like primal fear right there.
Yeah, but then after I read that, I'm like, that was
yeah.
You know, so he gave me Zodiac Killer, and then at the end, they never caught him. And I went back to Gary. I said,
they caught him, right?
They caught him, and he's like, no, they never caught him. I'm like, oh, gosh.
And the Zodiac was a real dude.
I live in the hood. And it's scary anyway. It seems it's darker there at night than it is anywhere else.
You know, it's funny because I've had a very similar situation in the last few years.
Really?
Right?
Yeah.
And it's because my best buddy now, his name is Dylan Hamer. And I'm going to send him a link to this too, so he knows I'm shouting him out.
Right.
I didn't grow up on horror movies.
Well, you know why?
Because you weren't into them, and neither was Mom at all.
The reason I wasn't into them is because
the Zodiac scared you straight.
No, when I was growing up, there were moments when I was growing up where I felt like my life was in danger. Like I legitimately thought I could die.
Yeah.
And it gave me that feeling, and I remember watching When a Stranger Calls. That's the horror I watched.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And that same feeling hit me. And I'm like, I will never watch a horror again because I don't like to feel like I'm going to die.
Yeah.
And that's because I know some people who've never been in that situation, they like horror because it gives them this thrill.
Yeah.
For me, that thrill is I'm going to die, you know?
Or it's like the juxtaposition. There's a big word for you.
That is, yeah.
I'm watching something incredibly dangerous, but I'm safe. And that gives me a sense of security.
Right, but I didn't, I felt threatened. So I never watched horror, Yeah, so
but
Dylan.
Yeah, so when I met Dylan, the first thing you really learn about him is how much he loves horror movies, right? He's a short filmmaker. He's really freaking good at it. You've seen his stuff. I've worked with him on some stuff, and it's a bunch of fun. He's really good at it.
Yeah.
And it's because he's a student of that genre, really,
He knows it, yeah.
And so when we started hanging out and you learn that about him, I come from the exact opposite.
Right.
And so, new buddy, I want to learn about your world, know. I'm a grown man. Hopefully I can handle it now, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I did the same thing. I was like, hey, the first time we hung out at his apartment, I said, what's the one I got to see?
Yeah.
Yeah. Give me the creme de la creme, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so I feel like we watched two in the same night. It was like a Saturday night. We stayed up real late. I know we watched Halloween, right?
Yeah.
With Michael Myers.
Oh, that's a good one.
Which I had never seen before.
That's when I was forced to watch, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a good one.
And that's me, a 27-year-old dude watching Halloween for the first time.
We didn't have a lot of horror movies around the house.
And the other one I can remember, I don't know if we watched it in the same night. But the other one, we watched Psycho, right? Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho.
That's almost, some of the things they call horror, I call thrillers. They don't.
Yeah. That one's kind of on the cusp. And then the other one, which is also kind of like a thriller, hopefully I'm saying it right, it's The Dawn of the Dead, like the original zombie movie, right?
Okay.
that basically, I mean, if you know anything about it or don't, up until that point, zombies were more like mind control deal.
Okay.
This was the first like Walking Dead style zombie movie that came out, and it rocks. It was good, super good.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's interesting, as a 27-year-old, I had kind of the same deal go on with one of my best buddies.
The other thing Gary loved was speed metal. Like heavy metal on speed.
Do you know what's funny?
What?
Dylan's also a metalhead. He was in a band for a bunch of years.
Yeah.
He's a metal guy, and he's introduced me to some.
He had
here's the
posters
best
on his
bands.
wall that looked like, had pentagrams and stuff on them. Like,
yeah, and you were like,
I was like, what the heck, And he's like, dude, listen. So he puts it on the record, and
yeah.
I'm like, what the heck?
Is that Iron Maiden?
I don't know
which
what
one are you doing?
I don't know. But you know what? After listening to it for a little while,
but I take yours too.
Yeah,
that sounds like Iron Maiden.
Yeah,
is what you just did.
That's kind of what I did. But it was these off bands that you'd never heard of, you never would again. There's no way they're playing them on any radio station.
Yeah.
But they got some talent, and they're they're throwing down crazy
licks.
Yeah. And it was like, I like music that's passionate. So I don't care what kind of music it is if it has some passion.
Yeah.
So I was like, dude, I said, will you take me to a concert of something that's not quite so crazy that I can go to?
An entry level deal, right?
And he said, well, and at the time we didn't have any money.
Yeah.
But as we got older, I remember, we'd go to, when we both graduated and got jobs, I remember one night he called me and he said, hey, there's a band that's going to be out in Fort Worth.
I think I know the band you're about to say. I'm stoked about this story. Yeah.
And I think if I recall, the name of the venue was the Garage or something to that. And he said, okay, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to work my way to the front because it's just standing room, but they're going to be moshing, so you got to stay to the back.
And you're like, what's moshing?
I didn't even know. Yeah. And it was the band was Pantera.
Texas legends, by the way.
Texas legends.
Texas royalty, like Pantera, dude.
We drove over there in his yellow Firebird, Formula Firebird. He ended up getting a Formula Firebird. Such a great car. We ended up driving out there, and I remember he worked his way up, and there were some dudes that were big dudes just smashing each other. And I could see through, and Gary was on the front row with his hair.
Yeah.
He was going...
Do you know what I'm picturing?
The whole time.
I think
the whole time.
Do you know what I'm picturing?
He's just snapping his neck.
This is what I'm imagining right now.
Yeah.
Do you remember in Ace Ventura when he's going to his hacker buddy to get some information?
Yeah.
And he goes to that club, and all these dudes are headbanging, and he goes... It starts going like this through the... That's what I'm watching.
I'm just standing back. But the music, and I think they played a song called not something from Hell.
Cowboys from Hell.
Cowboys from Hell.
That's the one, dude.
Dude, and I was like, I can't believe these guys are
rock.
Live music, even if it's not great, it's good.
Even if it's not your jam, it's still so good. Yeah.
And I was like, dude, I'm in on this. And so I remember after that, he started sending me. He'd make cassettes, this is back when you could cassette stuff, and he would send me stuff, and I'm into, I'm not gonna. The bands I like now are, sometimes I get caught driving up and down Eagle Road here.
Listen to something a little bit heavier.
Yeah, 9 Inch Nails or something, and I think we talked about when I found out your mom was pregnant with you. I was listening to
Alice in Chains.
Yeah.
That's greatness, man.
Yeah, but I remember one of the funniest things that ever happened to me and Gary is he picks me up one day, and he's got these wool. His seats got old, and his Firebird formula.
I'm going to stop you.
Okay.
Because you and Gary had a formula for getting into concerts.
Yes.
So before you tell the car story,
we actually paid to get into Pantera.
But so while we're on the subject of concerts, tell me how you and Gary used to get in.
So Gary realized very quickly that he could go anywhere. Gary taught me, you can walk into anywhere if you act like you belong.
Yeah.
He says you just walk right by people, and if they'll look at you, and if you act like you know what you're doing, a lot of times they'll leave you alone. So Gary went to a concert one night, and he saw a bunch of guys with black T-shirts on in big white letters said staff.
Yeah.
And he realized after a second or third concert, these were standard staff shirts.
Yeah.
And so he went and got some, had some made, and he'd come over and bring his staff shirts, and he'd say, We just walk in like we know what we're doing, and we'd walk into Reunion Arena at the time.
Yeah, because what's the worst thing? They call us out and we don't get to get in. We weren't supposed to be here anyway.
We saw a lot of rock and roll concerts
at Union Arena. You said
Reunion Arena.
Reunion Arena.
Yeah, that used to be where the Mavericks played when they first came.
Okay,
they built it for them.
Okay,
but yeah, we saw concerts there. We saw concerts in smaller venues, but they always had. And even if they did, it was interesting because I remember walking in somewhere one time downtown. And we walked in, and we were the only two guys with staff shirts on.
There was no other staff.
And we still just walked right in. We're like, how you doing? And we just walked right by people, and they're like, hey, good to see you.
Yeah.
And I'm like, nobody else has staff shirts. He said, don't matter, it just works.
They let us in, yeah. Can you remember anybody you saw with the staff shirt?
We saw a lot of guys and girls with staff shirts, but nobody ever questioned us.
No, sorry. Can you remember any of the groups or artists you saw with sneaking in for free?
We saw Kansas.
Kansas?
Yeah.
Woo! Okay.
We snuck into the Texas Jam one year. And
was that also at Reunion Arena?
No, this was in the Cotton Bowl. So every year, every year in the middle of the summer, they would invite 3 or 4 bands in, and they called it the Texas Jam, and the tickets were astronomically priced.
Yeah. Because it was
they were probably $50.
It was like then. $50. Yeah.
Which is like $500 now, right?
Yeah.
And so they had
because it was basically the 3 biggest acts of the year.
Yes.
Okay.
So the headliner.
Okay.
And this is probably 1985 or 86, somewhere around in there. The headliner, and this was their final going away tour.
Okay.
The headliner, and somebody will fact check me on this. It could have been 87, 88. I don't know.
Okay.
In the Texas Jam, the headliner was the Rolling Stones.
In their reunion tour in 85.
No, in their final tour.
Sure.
This is the finale.
This
by the
was
way.
the supposed to.
That ended up happening every 3 years for the next 20 years.
They're
right?
still going. I mean, they might still be touring.
Yeah. The band that went before them was ZZ Top.
Okay.
Which is a Texas band.
Yep. And by the way, from what I know about you, ZZ Top and Rolling Stones aren't really your jam.
No.
So you were there for the third act.
Well, they were the openers.
The openers,
because they weren't as big at this point.
Okay, they were like what, 1 album, 2 albums in, maybe.
Yeah, they were early.
Okay,
yeah.
Who was it?
And they were opening for those guys because those guys were more established.
Sure.
Van Halen. Oof. And I remember, it was so freaking hot. It was probably 110 degrees, and the sun. There's no shade, and the sun is shining, and they had a fire truck out there.
Okay.
And they were just hosing the crowd down.
That's so cool.
You would just be like, yeah.
You'd be like,
yeah. And like there's
when
like
it would hit you.
Yeah, there's like 100,000 people on the stadium grounds, and a stage at one end, and then there's probably another, I don't know. It was packed, man. But yeah, they're just hosing the whole stadium down of people.
That's awesome.
And people
and
had
still
heat
there
stroke.
there were still people that fainted and stuff.
Yeah, that was the greatest one we ever got into together with our staff T-shirts. Mm-hmm. By the way, we even, if I'm not mistaken, you had to pay to even get into. It was on the fairgrounds of Texas Fairgrounds.
Okay.
And so they had fences around Texas Fairgrounds. You had to pay to even get in there, but we didn't pay there either.
Okay.
So Gary said, "Hey, we got to sneak into the fairgrounds first, and then staff our way into the thing." I said, "How are we going to do that?" He said, "I know the perfect spot." Okay. Now keep in mind, the fairgrounds has razor wire tipped this way.
Yeah, it like angles outward.
Yeah, and it's razor wire.
Not barbed wire.
No, and the fences are 9 feet high.
This is what they use to keep criminals in.
Yeah, this is jail stuff. And so he's like, so there was one area that there was a bunch of trees in an area,
okay,
and there was a corner where the fence came together in a corner and made an L shape.
Yeah.
And the razor wire was tipped out, but when it came to that corner, it flattened out, so it was straight up.
Okay.
So we went to the thrift store and we got a couple of we bought 5 or 6 towels for 50 cents a piece, and we just threw the towels over the razor wire and shimmied over the top of it.
Climbed up the tree and then hopped there.
We climbed up
and
the fence.
And it was covered because...
But nobody could see us on either side because it was in a grove of trees.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And then, you're going to laugh at this.
You guys jailbroke the fairgrounds.
We jailbroke the fairgrounds to get in. And then we were leaving because Gary knew where it was at, so he parked nearby. And so, we snuck in. And then on our way out, I remember we were walking out, we were heading to his car, and we looked over in that grove of trees, and it was like off the beaten path, man. You had to really be looking for this little grove.
Yeah.
And there was 2 mountain bikes in there.
In the grove of trees?
Yeah. And Gary said, I wonder if somebody locked their bikes in there so nobody would see them, We go in there and they're not locked. And Gary says, we could snatch these bikes really quick.
Did he?
I said, we could, but do we really want to do that? He said, no, I don't know why I said that, but somebody's going to get these bikes stolen. I said, I think we're the only people coming in here, you know?
Yeah.
And so I don't really know what happened to the bikes.
Isn't that funny? We've all done that too. We're like, I could steal this so easy. I don't want to, but we could.
We're not thieves. But somebody's going to steal it.
Yeah.
And I think Gary's thinking, well, somebody's going to steal it. It might as well be somebody that, doesn't have a bike like me.
Sure.
I think that was his initial thought, but we were good about saving each other from those kind of situations.
Yeah.
But I remember one time we were driving over there.
And do you think that those guys on the mountain bikes did the same thing you guys did?
You know what? They possibly could have, because I don't imagine we're the only ones. Gary couldn't have been the only guy that figured that out. By the way, we used to go to the water park every year. We'd hitchhike to Grand Prairie from Oak Cliff.
Okay.
And we would.
Which is how far away, you think?
20 miles.
Okay.
Yeah. And then there was a corner that was hidden, and we would wear one T-shirt. We got so good that we didn't even need towels anymore. We could just shimmy over it. And we would wear one T-shirt, shimmy over, and then flip to another T-shirt, so that if somebody, because it wasn't as well hidden at the water park.
Gotcha. So if someone said, "Hey, two dudes in black T-shirts," yeah. Well, it wasn't us. We're wearing red T-shirts.
Right, and we had yeah. So we got pretty good about that. The place was called Wet and Wild, is what it was called.
Nice.
if I remember correctly, in Grand Prairie. But yeah, we'd do that. But I remember one time, for some reason, we were driving to Fair Park, and I think it was the fair. It was going to happen.
Okay.
And Gary picked me up at the house in his, I want to say, a 1979 yellow Pontiac Formula. It was like, it looked like a Camaro, but it was, the Camaro version.
Yeah.
And it was such a cool
car. It's like a Pontiac Solstice to the Nissan kind of deal. Okay. Everyone wants the Pontiac Solstice.
But his was cool because it had cool wheels on it. And it had it was
he
nice.
Churched it up a little bit.
Yeah, it was good looking.
Yeah.
And I think he's probably spent a little bit more than he should, but it was just a 6-cylinder engine. It wasn't super high performance.
Yeah.
So he rolls up one day. He
wasn't a speed demon or anything like that anyway.
No, not at all. He rolls up to me. I get in the car, and he's got these mohair wool seat covers. And these things are expensive, right? Mm-hmm. I'm like, Gary, dude, because his car was getting old.
It's big pimping, dude.
Yeah, and the seats were getting kind of torn up.
Yeah.
And so he'd gone, and I said, where'd you get these, man? He said, I got them at the bazaar. So bazaars, for those that don't know, are where an old burnt-out Kmart or something.
Yeah.
The Kmart leaves. They have a weekend bazaar.
Yeah.
People come in and sell fake jewelry.
Yeah.
Fake shoes.
And it's Hispanic people, Pakistanis, and Nigerians.
Yeah,
and they're all.
In the hood, it was Hispanics and blacks. In my neighborhood.
Yeah.
But I remember the greatest stereo I ever bought.
Okay. Was that a bazaar?
It was at a bazaar, and it was a UNICEF.
UNICEF?
I know, UNICEF. UNICEF.
Isn't that like
the stereo?
Isn't UNICEF like the?
I think it's the same name, but this was a UNICEF stereo. And listen to this.
Wait, because the UNICEF I'm thinking of is like
it's the same letters.
It's the United. Yeah. Like, isn't it for oil and something like that?
I don't know, but I remember going in and this thing was $10. You get it had a cassette player in it. It had the receiver and everything.
Yeah.
And I had an old Carmen Ghia. Let me finish my story about the wool seats, though.
Yeah.
So
mohair or wool or sheepskin? What were they?
It was sheepskin.
Sheepskin. Okay.
Yellowish off-white.
Because of course, when you say mohair, it makes me think of the rat hat from Seinfeld, right?
Yeah. No, it was a sheepskin. Yeah. It was the kind like they're real expensive.
Nutria.
Right? Yeah. And I said, because
sorry, I'm thinking of the wrong thing. Mohair is the sweater that he uses.
Mohair's the sweater that has a pink dot.
That makes his accountant sniffle. He's allergic to mohair. The Nutria is the rat hat, the big Russian hat that George wears. Sorry, little Seinfeld, little side right there.
We're both huge Seinfeld
fan. Anyway, so he's got the sheepskin covers, and you're like,
and they are not. You sit in them, you're like, whoa, these are nice, right?
Mm-hmm. On all four seats?
No, just the front two.
Front two, okay.
Yeah. So we're sitting there, we're styling, man, and we got the windows up because it's kind of chilly, and we're driving over. We get on the freeway and we start driving, and he speeds up, and then it starts getting
Mm-hmm.
two guys in the car, like a fishbowl. The sun starts shining through.
Yeah.
And
Y'all didn't have
fair time,
you didn't have
so
AC either.
No, it's fair time, so it's probably November, October, November area.
Okay.
Right, so it's getting cold.
Okay.
But it's not not that cold, right? So we start sweating, and I remember Gary says, I'm kind of getting hot. Roll down your window, I'll roll down mine, right? We're just going to get a breeze.
Yeah,
through.
you start cranking.
So we start cranking in unison. Yep. And all of a sudden, the whole car is filled with hair. It just goes, it's like we were in a hair storm. And we're like, wow, whoa, whoa, whoa. We couldn't see. I'm not kidding you, man. We couldn't see. We couldn't breathe. When you breathed in, it went in your throat. Gary's like, he pulls off the freeway. We get out. We open the doors and like a puff of hair, yellow hair flies out of the windows, man. Because it was the wind just started up and they were cheap. They were super cheap.
Yeah.
And I remember I was covered in it. He was covered in it. It was up our noses, down our throats. We were like, because they just got everywhere. It was like a mohair storm, or I don't know, sheepskin storm.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you can imagine just the fuzz coming off, just dryer lint.
That off-white fuzz just filled the car.
Just dryer lint filled the car, it seemed like.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah, and he was so mad. He's like, I paid $10 for this. But the funny thing is, one of those bazaars, I had a Carmen Ghia.
Yeah.
So no Volkswagen. Mm-hmm. And I had taken the back seat out, and I wanted to put a good stereo in there,
Sure.
Because you want a good stereo when you're a young guy, right?
Yeah.
And it had I put my UNICEF in, got it all set up, and I didn't have a speaker. And like now you can go buy these enclosed speakers and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, they're expensive, So me and Gary went to the thrift store and we found this house speaker. It was like this tall. Yeah.
Like 3.5 feet tall?
Huge.
And you got it at a thrift store, right?
At a thrift store, yeah. So we got it for probably less than $5. It was cheap, And so we take it, and it's too big for the slot to go in, And so Gary's like, let's just cut the back end of it off, and we'll just make it a faceplate with the speakers.
Okay.
And so we ended up just making the faceplate.
Yeah, because most of it is like encasing. Yeah. You only need the front part with the actual.
And we ended up setting it, and it fit in there. And I remember the first time I turned it on, it was like freaking, I'd never heard a stereo that good in my life. And it was just a home speaker in this $10 UNICEF deal.
That's funny.
And I remember one time.
I did something similar to a car that I had too.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like a big floor one. It was like maybe this wide. And we just propped it up because one of the speakers in the back blew out.
I remember
and
that.
And we wired it in there.
I think we still had that little boom box.
Oh, yeah?
Somewhere, yeah.
Let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
Because I have an answer for me.
Okay.
What's the song you put on when you realized it was bumping? And you said, I got to,
Yeah.
As a kid, you go, this would sound great with X song.
Yeah.
Do you remember what song you put on?
Yes, I do.
What song, when you realized your speakers were bumping, what song did you put on?
So back in the day, artists would come out with extended versions of songs.
Okay.
And they'd be like 13 minutes long or something.
Yeah.
And you could buy.
It was like a Justin Timberlake Timberland like track.
You could buy like a little 45, or I think the big one was an album size. I don't remember which one was which, but I think a 45 was a little one and a big one was like a 33 or something.
Okay.
But anyway, people.
It was a cassette.
No, we're talking about that. Right. You could buy an album that you put on a record player that was just all one song.
Yeah, but how did you put that in your car?
Well.
Here we go.
You record it onto a cassette.
Okay, you record. I thought you had Gary sitting there holding the record player, and you guys had wired it in there, and he's like, this sounds great.
No, but I can tell you what it was.
So you recorded on a cassette.
Stuck the cassette in, and me and Gary cruised around town listening to Erotic City by Prince. Yeah, because it has everything. It has bass lines, it has guitar, it has everything, and you crank it up, and I remember it just shaking the inside of the car. And we thought we were, the funniest thing ever though was we had this guy that we knew from a rich area, and he was dating one of the girls that we knew, and he had a really cool little Honda, that was like new. Mm-hmm. His parents had bought him a Honda. So Gary's got his, his big bright yellow Pontiac Firebird, and I'm driving a 62 Carmen Ghia. Okay. Right, junkers. Ours were junkers.
Yeah.
He rolls up in this, it was a cool little Honda. It was kind of a hatchback little thing. And we were in my car cranking up my stereo. And he was like, that's a pretty good stereo, man. I said, yeah. I didn't tell him it was UNICEF or, home speakers. And he says, "You want to hear a real good stereo?" I said, "Yeah."
Yes.
So we went and got in his car and he cranked it up, and it wasn't as good as mine. He had a Pioneer Super Tuner with extra woofers and tweeters and all this crap.
He had gone to the stereo shop to get that one done, and it wasn't as good as yours.
So I said, "Check this out," And I just had, here's what's funny. The front of the speaker box was we had just cut so it would fit in with like a jigsaw,
Yeah.
And it was rough and looked terrible.
Yeah, it was all janky.
Yeah. And so what we did was we found some extra material at a thrift store that was a pattern of a cheetah. And so we just wrapped it around and stapled it to the back. So it looked like this big,
That's awesome.
This big cheetah. It was just a flat piece. And if I drove too fast and stopped too fast, it would go poof and just fall down.
Yeah. And you couldn't see out your back window either, but it was worth it, right? You're like, I got side view mirrors. We're all good.
You could see out the back window because there was a little gap that you could put it in.
Sure.
But anyway, so he gets in my car. And I'm like, check it out. And I start, I think I busted out some, I know it was Rick James, Super Freak or one of those.
Yeah, something
or
with
Ghetto
a bunch of
or
bass.
something.
Yeah.
Something that just throws bass.
Yeah.
And it was shaking. And he was like, dude, man, where'd you get your stereo? And I didn't have the heart to tell him.
Yeah.
He said, I've never heard of UNICEF, man. Where do you get something like that? I'm like,
You got to go to the World Trade Federation to get freaking UNICEF.
Dude, and I think I dickered with the guy to get him down to $10. He might have wanted 15 for it, and I'm like, dude, I'll give you 10. That's all I got.
That's funny.
Dudes are like, yeah.
That's funny.
But yeah, you'd go there, and guys would try to sell you gold chains.
Yeah.
That you knew weren't gold, but they would hold them up and run
Rolexes.
Nolexes.
No Lexes. Yeah.
Well,
I
bought
some
Rolexes
off the street in Argentina.
There you go.
Yeah, and the face fell out of them after you wind it, you set the time. Right, you put it down, and then you look at the time, and the face is falling out the back of it.
Got a cartoon going, boing, and a spring is going like
Tom and Jerry, getting hit with gears in the face,
Yeah, and like a 20-year-old guy was going to have a Rolex.
I know, and it didn't even look like money either. It
was
but
you'd go in there and you'd see Air Jordans and all kinds of stuff, but you knew there would be something a little off, and you'd be like, ooh.
Jordan was doing the splits.
Yeah, he's got one leg bent or something. Yeah.
Jordan's bending his arm, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but half the guys in there selling were, like you said, they were they might be Indian
immigrants or whatever. Yeah.
And they were making a living, man, and you could go in there and get some good stuff occasionally.
Yeah, that was the best part. I experienced that in Argentina for the first time, right?
Yeah.
These bazaar mercado is what they call them, right?
Right.
Where you'd go in, and especially because I was there during the World Cup, the 2014 World Cup, right?
Right.
Where Argentina was on a tear that year, and they were so good, right? And so everyone had to go get jerseys, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was funny, you'd go in, and you could get varying degrees of a Messi jersey, for if you went to, it was called JJ Deportes, Jota Deportes was like the Foot Locker.
Right.
And if you went to the actual store, you would have to pay 1,600 pesos, right?
Gotcha.
$160, right, for a real jersey.
Right.
But if you went to the Mercado Libre, right, you could get a Messi jersey with varying degrees of quality for 20, 25, 30 pesos, right?
Same kind of thing.
And I remember one time the guy that I was with at the time, we went and bought them, and they were actually really good. Right? Yeah. And then we showed up to go watch a game with somebody, and the guy was looking at our jerseys, right? Mm-hmm. It was another, poor ghetto guy, and he was like, where the heck did you get those?
Right.
And we're like, over at this one for 30 pesos. And he looked at his, and his was so ghetto looking. And he went, I paid 75 for mine,
That's some of the crap that would happen.
Yeah.
That's some of the crap that would happen. But I tell you what, one of the most interesting experiences I ever had with Gary was...
Wait, hold on, just real quick. When I found out my speaker was bumping, the song that I played.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Runaway by Kanye.
Oh, yeah.
Which starts off with this real simple piano melody.
Right.
And then it bumps into some serious drums.
Yeah.
That's touted as maybe Kanye's best song.
Right.
And I knew that. I was like, I got to listen to Runaway.
On this speaker. You roll up all your windows and you just...
Well, here's what you do if you've got it. You roll up all the windows. You put the sunroof back.
Oh.
Right?
Because you do want other people to know you're listening to Kanye.
Well, I mean, not that you want it, but especially if it's like a, around here it would have been like a August evening.
Yeah.
Right, where it's cool but still a little, and so you get the air blowing through and you're bumping that song as loud as it'll go.
There's really nothing better than when you hear a really good song, and I still get in trouble for this, by the way, because that's my vice.
Yeah.
Late night ice cream and my music way too loud.
Way too loud.
My kids, I have 17-year-old twins.
Yeah.
And they get in the car and they go like, Dad, that's too loud. So I know when they say it's too loud, it's too loud.
And I think that what's so funny about that is I think that's a timeless experience.
Yeah.
Right? It don't matter if you're a boomer, Gen X, Gen Y. Right. It don't matter if whatever, right?
Yeah.
You roll your windows down and on a cool summer night, you play your favorite song as loud as it goes.
Listening to that music. And it fills it's almost like it doesn't just go into your ears, but it fills your whole body.
Yeah.
All
right, tell me the best Gary story, and then we'll wrap it up.
So Gary and I used to go to a club called the Apple.
The Apple.
And it was
let me do a recap of the clubs we heard about in Dallas. We got Fat Albert's, right?
Yeah.
Where was the one where you saw Carmen Electra?
Start Club.
Start Club, and now the Apple.
The Apple.
Okay.
Now the Apple was ghetto.
Okay, so we're talking Stark, Fat Albert's, and the Apple was at
the Apple. The Start Club was a 10. Fat Albert's was maybe a 7.
Okay.
The Apple was like a 2.
Oh, it was grimy.
Ghetto.
This is like the beginning of Roadhouse when Patrick Swayze first shows up.
Dude, ghettoer than that, man. Here's how ghetto it was. Is when I was growing up, there was a place called Bronco Bowl, and it was the original.
I've heard of that. You've told me about that.
Yeah, it was the original party. Like you could go in and play pool, you could bowl. They had like 100 lanes on both sides.
Wow, yeah.
You could go in. They had 100 pool tables. They had an archery range. They had a golf.
Whoa!
You could hit golf balls.
Like a driving range and everything?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
But it wasn't a full driving range. You just hit it up to a mat.
Sure. Yeah.
They also had a baseball. You
batting
could go hit
cage,
batting cages.
Yeah.
And archery. I mean, it was just
crazy, man.
Yeah, and video games.
Hopefully they made you
all.
sign a waiver for that. Yeah.
I never did that.
And you could drink and eat and stuff too. Right?
Yeah. It had food
awesome.
and
that's cool, man.
And Gary and I would go over there all the time, right? And we went over there all the time as kids. And we were horrible pool players.
Yeah.
So we would buy an hour, like for
play one game.
and play one game. Yeah. That's how it worked for us.
Yeah.
But I remember we were over there one day, and some of our friends, we saw some friends from high school. This is after high school, a couple years after high school. And it was a couple of Mexican dudes that we knew. And they said, hey, we're heading to the Apple. You should go with us. We're like, what's the Apple?
New club.
No.
Oh, it was.
It's been on the back of the Bronco Bowl our whole lives. We never even knew it was there. So we're like, really? What is it?
Yeah.
Like, it's just a bar and club. You can dance. You can have some fun. So we're like, yeah. So we go over there, and Gary and I don't drink.
Yeah.
But we love to dance, and Gary's handsome.
Yeah. So
everywhere
a
he
crowd
goes,
forms.
Yeah. So we go over there, and we're in there, and it's dark, and it kind of reminds me of without the techno music. You remember in the Bourne movie where they're in Russia?
Yeah.
And the guys in there, and everybody's dancing. It's dark.
Yeah.
That was kind of how this place was.
Okay.
And
strobe lights and everything like that.
Strobe lights and everything. Yeah. And so
where the ugly people go to dance because you don't see nobody.
Let me tell you. And Gary and I fit right in. Gary didn't. I did. So I'm in there, and we're just goofing around. We're with our buddies we went to high school with, a couple of Mexican dudes. And some Mexican girl comes up to me. She's kind of pretty. She said, "Want to dance?" I said, "Sure." So I start dancing with her. Next thing I know, I get bumped by a guy pretty hard. And I said, "Hey, what's going on?" I'm not the kind of guy that's looking for trouble.
Sure.
I can manage myself, and he said, "That's my girlfriend." And I said, "Well, she asked me to dance. I'm not sure what you want me to do."
Yeah.
And he rushed me, just bum rushed me. And he was bigger than me, and he knocked me to the ground. And I'm thinking, I'm about to get whooped.
Yeah.
Because I had been whooped in my life.
Yeah, because where there's one Mexican, there's
you ain't
more
fighting
Mexicans.
one. Yeah, and we had 2 with us.
Yeah.
But that ain't enough.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure they would have taken our side since I don't know, right? Who knows? But
yeah,
I got bum rushed.
Maybe one of those country loyalty things kicks in. You never know. La Patria, right?
Yeah.
All of a sudden.
But he's on top of me. And I'm thinking, dude, I'm in trouble.
By the way, remind me to show you, Mexico just came out with a new soccer jerseys for their upcoming tournament.
Yeah.
They're black and gold. They're cool.
Dang, boy, that's a good color combo.
Anyway, sorry.
So I'm on the ground, and he's like on top of me. And he's swinging, and he's doing stuff, and I'm like trying to defend. I mean, I don't know. It's just a mess, And the dude jumps up and takes off running. Like he got out of there. So I stood up, and Gary's like right there. He just shows up. Gary was coming to help me, but the guy got up and ran. Mm-hmm. And I said, hey, what's going on, man? What's happening? And Gary says, why are you slurring? And I said, I'm not slurring. I thought I was talking normal.
Yeah.
He says, your words, you're not talking right. What's going on? And I'm like, I don't know. What's going on? And I looked down, and he had stabbed me in the hip.
Oh, my gosh.
He had, with some small, it couldn't have been very big.
It wasn't like a steak knife or nothing.
It could have been, who knows. But it wasn't so deep. It didn't cause any damage other than just surface kind of stuff, right?
But it was shooting blood out.
It wasn't shooting it, but it was seeping.
You were losing it,
And I looked down, and my shirt was red. It was getting bloody. And Gary it's the only time I've ever in my life seen Gary like
scared. Yeah.
Yeah. Because Gary was like me. You learn in the hood.
Duck and cover, basically.
You run.
Yeah.
If you're in trouble, run, because running will save your life.
Yeah.
And the old saying in the hood is, people won't chase you down to beat you up.
Yeah.
And so it was, and I remember Gary said, you're not talking right, come on. And he grabbed me, and I mean, we went straight to the doctor. And the doctors, they took a look at it, and it was just, they stitched it up. But I remember him, the look in his eyes, and I'll never forget that look, like he is scared.
Yeah.
And when I saw his eyes, I'm like, oh, I'm scared now, you know?
Yeah.
And it scared me.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things that I didn't see it happen. I didn't really feel it. Once it was there and I saw it, I felt it.
You became aware of it. Yeah.
But that was the night
it's probably because he was like, my brother's in trouble, you know? You guys were brothers out there.
Basically, we were.
That's great.
And I think that's what I tell him now, you know, remember that night you saved my life? Shut up, I didn't save your life. That's what I like to tell him. But yeah, that's Gary is, I mean, I got a million
We could do part 2 if we wanted to. Maybe we will someday.
Yeah, but Gary, you know, many of us have these friends that we grow up with that are just fun.
Yeah.
You know, and you realize not everybody has that.
Yeah.
I feel real lucky that
For me, and I didn't have him very long. It was only a little bit. Was Mason Lucero.
I remember this guy. Yeah.
Mason Lucero was the bomb. And we're out of time, but sometime we'll have to tell some Mason Lucero.
Yeah.
And then
shout out to Mason Lucero.
Shout out to Mason. And I haven't talked to him in a long time. So
you know what? I know you get some stories about him.
Yeah, we'll do an episode on Mason Lucero.
Because he was kind of a Gary-ish
and then I'll send it to him, and that'll be our way to like reconnect.
Sounds good.
I would love to hear from Mason.
Sounds good.
Cool.
All right.
See you guys.
See you guys next time.